Hello and welcome back to The World This Week with me, Jonathan Steele. Now, in this second part of the programme, we're going to be looking to the future of Afghanistan and asking what lies ahead after US troops withdraw in 2014. Will Afghanistan be able to overcome corruption, achieve peace and become a functioning democracy? And what role will international powers like Pakistan and India play in its future? Well, with me in the studio, I'm delighted to reintroduce Orzala Ashraf Nemat, Afghan researcher and civil society activist, and Sheikh Abdullah Anas, founder of the Taruf Association and a former Mujahideen fighter against the Soviet occupation. On the phone, we have Labour peer Lord Nazir Ahmed, Professor Anatol Lieven, Chair of International Relations at the War Studies Department of King's College London and author of Pakistan, a Hard Country, and Hanan Habibzai, former journalist and editor-in-chief at the Research School for Media and Communications, which facilitates academic research in Afghanistan. Well, let me come to you, Hanan Habibzai. How realistic do you think it is that the Taliban may actually control the levers of power again in Afghanistan once the Americans and the other foreign troops leave?
The problem started with the invasion of Afghanistan, followed by major war crimes in the history of Afghanistan, and still continued, which need to be stopped immediately. Since then, the U.S. has turned the country over the warlord, and now the country is heading toward disaster. Many people show sympathy with the Taliban because there are injustice in the ground. And just last Sunday morning in Kunduz, state gunmen knocked several doors in a village. When a family member got up to answer the knocks, he has been shot on the spot. U.S. Army, Karzai regime, and all other involved organizations confirmed that the victims were civilians. The question arises here, why the killers still on state duty, why they kill civilians if the mission is to support peace and democracy, where the Afghan constitution. The reality is that the U.S. lead force used a tactic called Hegelian dialectic. The state gunmen massacred people in Kunduz, and the other day they managed to explode a funeral in Jalalabad to turn the attention from the U.S.-sponsored state crimes to the other issue. This is something because of injustice in the country. In the victims, therefore, many people joined the Taliban movement to resist and revenge.
But what about, let's look ahead to when the US troops are not there, and therefore, in theory, the need to resist the US troops is not there. Will the Afghan National Army be able to hold back the Taliban, or will the Taliban conquer the country?
This is, I think, impossible because Taliban gained a lot of the majority of support within the villagers. Look, Afghanistan is not a country of city. Afghanistan is a country of villages, rural areas. There are many people in the rural areas. They show sympathy with the Taliban because of the injustice in the in corruption within the government. So Taliban gets stronger day by day. This is something confirmed by the International Security Force and also by many reports we have from Afghanistan, news reports. So I think there would be a problem, challenges ahead if America pull out, United States pull out from Afghanistan. The military, the current armies, forces, police in Afghanistan is unable to, to compete with the Taliban because the force, the structure of the force in police run by U.S. Army, the U.S. dollars, and as soon as they stop the dollar on them, the army will...
Well, thank you. Let me now turn to one of our studio guests in London here, Orzala Ashraf Nemat. Are you of the same view that the Taliban will be able to take over quite quickly?
I would like to disagree with what the guest, Mr. Habibzai, was saying in terms of Taliban coming from the village and having a lot of support in the village. In fact, this view probably belongs to 1996, when the Taliban first tried to conquer a country during the civil war. But in the last 10 years, the same way the hatred towards the international forces due to the civilian casualties rise up among the Afghan people, regardless of their location, whether they are villagers or they are the city residents, I think equally people find out, and people are more confident that the Taliban cannot be their rulers. Why? Simply because they have seen the atrocities committed by Taliban, the beheadings of the ordinary laborers traveling in search of jobs from Laghman to Iran. On the way in Kandahar is one of the examples, and there are plenty of other examples.
I mean, we know that there are atrocities by the Taliban. We know that there are killings of civilians by the US forces, and it helps the Taliban, as it were, in their propaganda. But you know, just give me your perspective.
Well,
do you think the Taliban will take over in Kabul within a few months or even a year or two after the US withdraws?
All these questions, whether Afghanistan as a country will collapse or stand, whether the Taliban or any other force will emerge and, like the Taliban, and come and take the rule, it very much depends on what the world want to do with Afghanistan. And by world, I would like to say it's not only the United States and the international alliances, but also the regional actors. It very much depends on the level of support in the way that not only visibly, but visible and invisibly, they are trying to be engaged in Afghanistan. When in the 1992, when after the US withdrawal, Afghanistan collapsed as a state, it was not because the international community, and particularly the US and the West, left Afghanistan on its own. Partly that was the case, but the other part was the strengthening or the more active role by regional actors. For example, Iran supported their own groups, specific groups in Afghanistan, and they started to fight for their own part. There was no jihad. What kind of jihad was that? The civil war. It was basically a war for power and gaining power and destroying the entire country. The Pakistani side also supported their own groups, and many of the Arab countries also had their own money flooding to Afghanistan and supporting their own kind of groomed Mujahideen leaders. So that created a chaos or a situation that opened the way for a radical group like Taliban. But what I would like to say about the future, I mean, the experiences of the 3 decades of war in Afghanistan, if we are here to learn one lesson from it, that lesson is that Afghanistan as a country and its people cannot get along with any kind of radical change and radical regime. Whether it is a left radical or a right radical, they will not have any future in Afghanistan. Because anyone who wants to create a dictatorship in Afghanistan, it will not last for any long. We are a country by nature and by the diversity that we have, we are a country that we can live much better with a more tolerant government, more democratic systems and open systems that allows different ethnicities, different people with different backgrounds to function and act together rather than having the authoritarian regime by one force to lead the rest.
Okay, well, let me call on Lord Nazir Ahmed to come in on that point. I mean, you've heard a relatively optimistic analysis of what may happen in the future. Do you think that is, did you share that optimism?
Well, some of it. I'd like to think that I would like to see, obviously, peace in Afghanistan, but I actually don't agree because there are issues in relation to the neighboring countries, and particularly when the Western world has allowed India to play a greater role than Pakistan. People forget that almost half of the Afghanistan's population is Pashtun, and Pakistan has a full tribe, a full province, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is also Pashtun, and they have relatives across the border and very much share everything with them. But more importantly, Pakistan sees Afghanistan, which has become a base for insurgency within Pakistan. The Baloch nationalists have been getting training and equipment from Afghanistan, and the Indian intelligence services has been playing a very active role in there to create instability inside Pakistan. And let me just say, before any experts jump in there, I've actually been to Swat Valley and also in tribal areas just this weekend. Last week I was there. I've spoken to people, and I've actually been to Balochistan too. So I do know a little bit about this area. And I think that, when you have Pakistan, that has played a very important role in the past, has a hugely important role to play when Pakistan sees itself being isolated from playing any good role in Afghanistan. I don't see that there will be a peace in Afghanistan. If anything, there will be instability, and unless the Pashtun are brought into confidence, the majority of the people, then you will not have the support of a great majority of people in there. There are people, I've always seen this on television and elsewhere, there are small minorities, from the north-western side, the 5%, of the mix and the mixture of lots of nationalities that were controlling 5% of Afghanistan, who said that they represented the voice of Afghanistan. Unfortunately, they're not. The majority happen to be Pashtun, and you will see that when the NATO, ISAF, UN, and the US, when they leave, of course they're not going to leave immediately. They will keep their presence there, but I do not see situation improving. Already we know Karzai only controls Kabul and areas around there. There are a lot of areas which are still controlled by, whether the lady agrees or not.
I want to bring in, if I may, Professor Anatol Lieven. Professor Lieven, let me press you on this issue of, do you think the Taliban will take over once ISAF pulls out? And linked to that, obviously, is that what Pakistan wants? Does Pakistan want a military victory by the Taliban?
Well, I think it's a question of where and how far. The Taliban obviously already control a very large part of the Pashtun countryside. It's a question of whether they could extend that first to the cities in the Pashtun areas, and then beyond that to Kabul and the non-Pashtun areas of the country. I think myself that the Taliban will in fact conquer most of the Pashtun countryside that they don't conquer already. But I think it will be exceptionally difficult for them to storm the non-Pashtun areas. They had a great deal of difficulty and had a very hard fight doing that in the 1990s, when there were much weaker international forces ranged against them. I also think that, and by the way, that's also Pakistani military analysis, I also think that Pakistan, to judge by the interviews I've conducted, or when you say Pakistan, you really mean the Pakistani security establishment, does not want the Taliban to conquer the whole of Afghanistan, because they're afraid that if they do that, they would be able to revive the idea of claiming back the Pashtun areas of Pakistan, which has been an Afghan agenda in the past. But this time under the banner of Islam, and of course with Islamist rebels, allies in Pakistan itself. So I think that the mainstream Pakistani security analysis is that it would be far better to have a situation in Afghanistan in which certainly the Taliban have a very considerable share of power because they do have a considerable share of public support.
But if it's true, as you say, that Pakistan doesn't want a military victory by the Taliban, they don't want them to take over the whole country, why doesn't Pakistan put some pressure right now on the Taliban to negotiate and to look for a compromise?
Well, they have put a certain amount of pressure to negotiate, but the question is, of course, to negotiate on whose terms and towards what end. I'm sorry to say that Pakistan has no confidence in the existing US strategy over Afghanistan and doesn't trust the US to conduct an honest search for peace as opposed to a tactical effort to split and weaken the Taliban. And so, of course, the Pakistani establishment is deeply concerned about committing itself to a peace process, which it would see as doomed to failure, but which, in their view, would then lead to Pakistan being scapegoated for that failure. So they're pursuing a very cautious policy in that regard. Now, it may be, perhaps, that the U.S. approach will change after the U.S. presidential election. At the moment, everything in Washington is on hold.
All right, Sheikh Abdullah Anas, you haven't yet had a chance to answer this key question, really. Do you think, after NATO troops withdraw in 2 years' time, the Taliban will be able to capture Kabul?
It's not a matter of Taliban will take over or not, will take 50% or 20% or 90%. I will never be happy to see after 2014 the same scenario repeated of 1992. I am as a witness of that period. We fought against Soviets for years. And then we faced the day when we entered Kabul. So we have to make separation, complete separation between the war jihad against occupiers and the political stability, bring back stability to Afghanistan. Afghanistan for all ethnics.
No, I
Afghanistan
is
all.
Excuse me, I'm not asking you what you want. I'm trying to ask you to look ahead into a crystal ball based on your experience. Do you think the Taliban are in a position to capture Kabul? It's not whether you want it to happen. Will it happen, do you think?
Look. After 1992, Mujahideen, because there was no vision for stability in Afghanistan, and because that country is open for the neighbors and for the other agendas, no one can be defeated in Afghanistan. If you fail to get arms from Pakistan, you will get it from Iran. If you fail to get it from Iran, you will get it from India and Russia. So that's why the big question, all politicians, all ethnics in Afghanistan must prepare themselves from now, before 14, to have good state. This kind of Pashtun or Farisi, I don't think could be a big problem if we make the agendas out of it, because both countries, Afghan and Pakistan, are Hanafi mazhab. Majority of them are Muslim Sunni. So the question is how to go beyond the withdrawal of NATO. What you want for Afghanistan? Islamic Emirate, Islamic Republic, parliamentary system, presidential system. All these kind of debates, it's frozen now. The Afghans are not talking to each other. What we want. Are we going to repeat the scenario of 1992, which is civil war? Or are we going to repeat 1996 when Taliban entered Kabul, but that was fine, finished? No, nothing was finished. Another group, another ethnic, they went to the north and they launched their resistance for 4 years till they came, another circumstances changed, and they came back to Kabul after 9/11. After 14, are we going to repeat the same or no? Politicians in Afghanistan, ethnics in Afghanistan, scholars, all factions must be ready to negotiate the stability of Afghanistan beyond the withdrawal of NATO, because this is not the first time the foreigners come to Afghanistan and goes, but the questions still remain. Now, so this is, as a member of peace talks in Afghanistan, we are pushing this initiative to answer this kind of questions. Just recently we had a big, with all factions in Afghanistan, communists, governments, Talib, former Mujahideen, Panshiri, many. We had a 2 days discussion. The big questions was proposed in that meetings, the blaming between the Afghans themselves. One is saying, you are working with the occupiers. The other saying, did you ask yourself who brought the occupiers to Afghanistan? So this kind of questions needs to be answered by the Afghans themselves and their neighbors, whether Pakistan or India or Iran. They have the bad experience in the past. You tried to infiltrate Afghanistan, everyone having his own group, and you see the consequences now. Pakistan itself, it's burning. Iran will never remain. So why not changing that experience from trying to infiltrate Afghanistan? Why not try to bring stability to Afghanistan? Because instability in Afghanistan, it means instability in those countries. Stability in Afghanistan, stability to those countries. So this is the big question needs to be discussed.
The other big question, which is really important, is how much progress has really been made in the 10 years since the occupation started, and particularly, in human rights and women's rights. Orzala Ashraf Nemat, I mean, do you think that women's rights, which was trumpeted at the beginning by George Bush and Tony Blair as one of the purposes of this invasion, have they really achieved a breakthrough?
Yeah, just before going there, I just want to make one comment regarding what was said before, that actually if we make this assumption that the Taliban representing the Pashtuns and the other oppositions are representing the government of Afghanistan, this is a very baseless assumption to make. Because the Pashtun people, particularly the Pashtun people of the southern Afghanistan, where supposedly they are the majority living there, and the Pashtun people living in the eastern Afghanistan are the first and the most victims of the current atrocities made by different warring factions, whether it is the Taliban or the oppositions, because that's something that must be recorded and must be said there. No political group at the moment has a very clear ethnical side, whether it is the Taliban or non-Taliban. Maybe they have influences here and there, but we cannot. And as an Afghan, I would like to emphasize that this is not correct to create and follow the same old kind of divide and rule policy of saying that, oh, Pashtuns will not tolerate the Tajiks and Tajiks will not tolerate Pashtuns. Probably it's a small example, but I would like to say it here, is the example of the sports young man in the Olympics here. A Hazara young man brought back a bronze medal, not even a gold medal, a bronze medal, and he was equally in the same way was appreciated in the southern Afghanistan and the eastern Afghanistan by Pashtuns, Tajiks, non-Pashtuns or Uzbeks and Pashas, and everyone celebrated him. So the sense of national unity is there, and if India or Pakistan or any other country wants to play that game, I must tell them that this is going to waste their resources and their wishes. Another attempt was made to create division by blowing up a Shia shrine ceremony, during the Mahrams, the horrible Mahram blowing up. And the next day, the media was talking too much. These so-called experts were talking too much about, oh, now that the Sunnis will turn against the Shias and now the Shias will turn against the Sunnis. Nothing happened because the Afghan people have learned so many lessons throughout the recent history, because we have experienced and witnessed what happened, how we were used against one another. So these learnings from the history will help us to go forward. But coming back to the question of the progress made or not, it will not be very justice to say that no progress was made. We have a parliament, we have women back to the social field active. We have institutions built. Of course, there are challenges, and they are enormous level of challenges. Corruption is on the top of it, and I think if we were not filling in this corruption system, then probably the situation today could be very different. I'm
afraid I'm going to have to cut you off.
One last thing I would like to say.
Just the last thing. I know you're the optimist among our group.
Well, I have no choice but to be an optimist. I'm an Afghan.